The invisible gardener Fiona Novak moved through the Willowbrook Botanical Gardens like a shadow between sunbeams. At 28, she had mastered the art of near invisibility, arriving before dawn, leaving after dusk, and spending her days tending to plants that responded to her touch in ways people never seemed to. Her small frame and quiet demeanor made it easy for visitors to look past her as they admired the vibrant displays she meticulously cultivated. "The dahlias are spectacular this season," a woman commented to her husband as they strolled past Fiona, who was kneeling in the soil nearby. "It's like they're dancing." Fiona didn't look up, but a faint smile touched her lips. The dahlias had been stubborn this year, refusing to thrive until she'd adjusted their soil composition after noticing subtle yellowing at their leaf edges. 3 weeks of careful amendments had coaxed them back to their full glory. The couple walked on without acknowledging her presence, but Fiona didn't mind. The flowers noticed her. That was enough. Dr. Eliza Temple, the garden's director, often told Fiona she had botanical empathy, an uncanny ability to diagnose plant ailments before they became visible to others. What Fiona never mentioned was how she sometimes wished she could understand people with the same clarity. "I was born without whatever makes people feel connected," she once confided to Eliza during a rare vulnerable moment. "I watch visitors holding hands looking at each other instead of the flowers, and I just don't understand what they're experiencing." Eliza had studied her with kind eyes. "Perhaps you simply love differently, dear." On this particular Tuesday morning in late spring, Fiona was transplanting orchids in the tropical greenhouse when the garden's administrative assistant, Percy, poked his head through the door. "We've got a photographer coming today," he announced, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Some big shot from National Geographic. Dr. Temple wants you to show him around." Fiona nearly dropped the delicate white phalaenopsis in her hands. "Me? Can't you do it, or Josephine?" Josephine Winters was the garden's educational coordinator, polished, articulate, and comfortable with strangers in a way Fiona had never managed to be. "Josephine's leading the school tour, and I'm stuck in meetings all day," Percy replied. "Besides, Dr. Temple specifically requested you. Said no one knows these gardens better." Fiona carefully settled the orchid into its new pot. When 11. Main entrance. Percy disappeared before she could protest further. By 10:58, Fiona had changed from her soil-stained work clothes into the cleanest uniform she could find. Though a stubborn smudge of dirt remained on her elbow, she twisted her auburn hair into a hasty bun and walked to the entrance, heart pounding with uncharacteristic anxiety. At precisely 11, a tall man with broad shoulders and a camera bag slung across his chest walked through the gates. Dominic Westerly didn't look like what Fiona had expected. No safari vest or pretentious air-just-worn jeans, a simple button-down shirt rolled to the elbows, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. When those eyes landed on her, Fiona felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. "You must be my guide," he said, extending a hand. His voice was deep but gentle, like distant thunder without the threat of storm. "Fiona Novak. I'm just the gardener," she replied, briefly touching his hand before withdrawing hers. Dominic smiled. "There's no just about being a gardener. You're the reason I'm here. I want to photograph what grows under your care." Fiona blinked, unsure how to respond to being seen so directly. "Where should we begin?" he asked, as she led him toward the rose garden. Fiona couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just changed, like the first hint of green, breaking through soil after a long winter dormancy. Captured light Dominic Westerly saw the world through frames, moments isolated in time that revealed truths otherwise missed in the constant flow of life. As he followed Fiona through the winding paths of Willowbrook Gardens, his camera remained untouched in its bag. Instead, he watched her. "The Japanese maples were transplanted 3 years ago," Fiona explained, gesturing toward a collection of trees with leaves like delicate hands reaching toward the sky. "They struggled at first, but now they're thriving, like you, Dominic." Observed quietly, Fiona turned, startled. "I'm not sure what you mean." "You move through this place like you're part of it, not separate. It's rare to see someone so... integrated with their environment." He finally reached for his camera. "May I?" She nodded, stepping aside. But instead of photographing the maples, he aimed his lens at a small section of pathway where Fiona had been standing. Wild flowers pushed through cracks in the stone-tiny purple blooms most visitors would trample without noticing. These shouldn't be growing here, he said. Someone would typically remove them. But you've left them. Fiona shifted uncomfortably. They're not hurting anything, and they work so hard to exist. Over the next week, Dominic followed Fiona through every section of the gardens. He photographed the grand displays of the Rose Pavilion, the topiary garden, the massive Victorian greenhouse, but his favorite images captured the small evidences of Fiona's touch, a repaired bird feeder hidden among jasmine vines, seedlings, growing in salvaged containers, handwritten labels with care instructions so detailed they read like love letters. On the 8th day, rain poured relentlessly from leaden skies. Fiona found Dominic in the orchid house, photographing water droplets sliding down glass panes. Dr. Temple mentioned you're extending your stay, she said, arranging potted specimens on a workbench. The magazine wants a seasonal series now. He replied, I'll be here through winter. Something unfamiliar stirred in Fiona's chest, a warmth that felt dangerously close to anticipation. She busied her hands with the plants. Have dinner with me tonight, Dominic said suddenly. When she didn't immediately respond, he added, to discuss the autumn garden plans. That evening, at a small restaurant overlooking the town's river, conversation flowed more easily than Fiona expected. Dominic spoke of growing up in crowded cities, always seeking green spaces, finding solace in botanical gardens around the world. I photographed 17 major gardens across 5 continents, he told her. None of them feel like Willowbrook, because we're smaller because of you. He placed a portfolio on the table. These are my favorite shots from this week. Fiona opened the folder to find images of herself, not portraits, but glimpses caught in moments of work, her hands gently pruning. A bonsai, her silhouette backlit among tall grasses, her reflection in a garden pond. In each image, she appeared ethereal, as though she were an extension of the garden itself. I don't understand, she whispered. You say you don't know what love feels like, Dominic said softly, but I've been photographing it all week. In every action you take with these plants, you just haven't recognized it in yourself. Fiona closed the portfolio, suddenly overwhelmed. You're seeing something that isn't there. Or perhaps, Dominic suggested, I'm seeing something you've never been shown. As rain continued to fall outside, Fiona felt as though something long dormant within her had received its first nourishing drops after an endless drought. Developing frames, the Willowbrook Autumn Exhibition transformed the gardens into a celebration of color and light. Fiona typically avoided these events, preferring to work behind the scenes, but this year was different. Dominic's photographs, those of Fiona's invisible touches throughout the gardens, had become the centerpiece of the exhibition. Everyone's talking about your work, Dr. Temple told Fiona, as they surveyed the crowded gallery space in the visitor center. The board is impressed. They're discussing creating a new position, head of botanical design, with you in mind. Tugged nervously at her dress sleeves, unfamiliar with both the formal attire and the attention. I just do what the plants need. That's precisely why you're perfect for it, Dominic said, appearing beside them with 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to Fiona, their fingers brushing momentarily. Throughout the evening, Fiona found herself introduced to donors, botanists, and magazine editors who spoke of her work with admiration. Each time she began to retreat into herself, she would find Dominic's eyes across the room, his steady gaze anchoring her. Later, as the crowd thinned, they walked through the illuminated autumn gardens. Lanterns hung from maple branches, casting golden light across pathways covered in crimson leaves. You survived, Dominic noted, his shoulder occasionally bumping against hers as they walked. Barely, Fiona admitted. I don't know how to be the person they think I am. You don't have to be anything other than yourself. He stopped beneath a particularly vibrant Japanese maple. That's who they're responding to. Fiona stared up at the glowing leaves. My parents died when I was very young, she said unexpectedly. I grew up in the foster system, never stayed anywhere long enough to ... connect. Plants became my constants. They don't leave. They don't expect things I can't give. Dominic remained silent, giving her space to continue. I've always felt like I'm missing something fundamental that everyone else has. Some capacity for feeling that was never developed. She turned to face him. What if I'm just broken? You're not broken, Fiona, Dominic said firmly. You've just been growing in difficult conditions, like those wildflowers pushing through stone. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The simple touch sent warmth cascading through her body. Leave for Indonesia next month, he said quietly. A 3-week assignment. The warmth inside Fiona instantly cooled. Of course, he was leaving. Everyone always did. The gardens will still be here when you return, she said, stepping back slightly. Dominic studied her face. Will you? Where else? Would I go? She replied, but they both recognized her withdrawal, the careful pruning of a connection growing too quickly, too intensely. In the weeks that followed, Fiona threw herself into preparation for winter. She accepted the new position, worked longer hours, and tried not to notice how frequently she checked her phone for messages from Dominic, who sent daily photos from his travels, ancient trees in Bali, rice terraces in Java, and finally, an image of an airplane window with the caption, "Coming home, home." The word echoed strangely in Fiona's mind as she prepared the gardens for his return. Uncertainty and anticipation intertwining like vines around her heart. The winter garden December brought bitter cold to Willowbrook. An unprecedented polar vortex descended without warning, threatening the outdoor collections and straining the heating systems in the greenhouses. Fiona hadn't slept properly in 3 days, moving between buildings with thermal blankets and portable heaters, monitoring temperatures hourly. The backup generators can't handle this load much longer, Percy warned as they checked the tropical house thermostats. If we lose power completely, ... We won't, Fiona insisted, though worry gnawed at her. Some of these specimens were irreplaceable, decades old, collected from remote locations, nearly extinct in the wild. She was adjusting ventilation in the desert house when Dominic found her. He looked travel-worn, but immediately rolled up his sleeves. Tell me what you need, he said simply. For the next 48 hours. They worked alongside the small garden staff in shifts. When the main power finally failed during the night, Dominic helped Fiona transport the most sensitive plants to the visitor center, where the emergency generator remained operational. They converted the exhibition hall into a temporary greenhouse, arranging plants by temperature needs and humidity requirements. Near dawn, the crisis temporarily stabilized. They sat exhausted among the rescued orchids. Outside, snow continued to fall in thick, silent sheets. Why did you come back now? In the middle of this? Fiona asked, her voice hoarse from fatigue. Dominic leaned his head back against the wall. I had planned a whole speech about how I couldn't stop thinking about you while I was away. How for the first time in years I wasn't just capturing moments but wishing I was part of them. With you, Fiona's heart quickened as he continued. Then I landed and checked my messages. Heard about the cold snap and knew where you'd be? Smiled tiredly. So instead of a speech, I brought coffee and thermal blankets. I might prefer that to a speech anyway, Fiona admitted. They sat in comfortable silence until Dominic spoke again. While I was in Bali, I visited a temple where they believe certain plants house spirits. The caretaker therein, old woman Hood, tended the garden for 60 years, told me something I can't stop thinking about. She said true love isn't an emotion, but a practice, something you do daily, not something you feel constantly. Fiona considered this, like gardening. Exactly like gardening. Patient, attentive, sometimes difficult. He turned to face her. You've been practicing love your entire life, Fiona. You just didn't recognize it because you were looking for fireworks instead of seeing the sustained flame. I'm afraid, she whispered. Not of loving, maybe, but of being left again, of being too much or not enough. That's the winter of it, Dominic said softly. The dormant period that seems like death but is actually preparation for growth. Trust. The cycle. As morning light filtered through snow-covered windows, Fiona tentatively reached for his hand. The connection was simple, warm, terrifying, and somehow like coming home. Perennial bloom spring arrived at Willowbrook with explosive vigor, as though the harsh winter had compressed growth only to release it all at once. Crocuses and snowdrops carpeted the lawns, cherry blossoms created clouds of pink and white, and the gardens hummed with returning life. The renovation of the damaged greenhouses was nearly complete, with improvements that would make them more resilient to future temperature extremes. The crisis had brought unexpected attention to Willowbrook, resulting in increased donations and a feature in Dominic's magazine that highlighted both the botanical treasures and the dedicated team that had saved them. Fiona stood in the center of the rose garden, surveying the new growth with satisfaction. Many of these bushes had been severely damaged, cut back to nearly nothing. Yet here they were sending up fresh stems, unfurling new leaves, preparing to bloom again. "Just like you," came Dominic's voice from behind her. Echoing his words from nearly a year before, she turned with a smile, no longer startled by his observations or his presence in her life. Over the winter months, they had developed a rhythm. Together, his photography assignments taking him away periodically, but always with a return to Willowbrook, to her. They had learned each other slowly, carefully, with the same patience Fiona showed her most delicate plants. "The exhibition opens next week," she said. "Dr. Temple is nervous about the turnout." "She shouldn't be," Dominic replied, showing Fiona. His phone screened an online article about upcoming cultural events featuring Willowbrook's Phoenix Garden exhibition prominently. People are fascinated by resilience, by beauty that survives difficulty. As they walked through the gardens, Fiona noticed subtle changes in herself, how she no longer avoided eye contact with visitors, how she had begun leading specialized tours, sharing her knowledge openly. The protective shell she had cultivated throughout her life was gradually opening, like a tightly closed bud responding to warmth. That evening, they sat on the small porch of Fiona's cottage at the edge of the garden grounds. Dominic had been photographing spring ephemerals, wildflowers that bloomed briefly before disappearing until the following year. "I have something for you," he said, placing a small wooden box in her hands. Inside was a delicate silver pendanta, miniature terrarium containing tiny preserved ferns and flowers. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "There's more." He handed her an envelope containing official-looking papers. "A grant for a new program at Willowbrook Horticultural Therapy for foster children, if you want to direct it." Fiona stared at the papers, emotion welling up unexpectedly. "How did I had the idea after you told me about your childhood? The board loved the concept, especially with your background in both botany and the foster system." He watched her carefully. "Is it too much?" she said firmly. "It's perfect." She looked out at the gardens stretching before them, twilight softening their edges. "When I was a child, moving between homes, I used to collect seeds from wherever. I stayed, even just a dandelion or maple helicopter. I'd plant them in paper cups, and when I had to leave, I'd find places to transplant them. Little pieces of myself I was leaving behind, hoping they'd grow, even if I couldn't see them." Dominic took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I think I've always known what love feels like," Fiona continued softly. "Didn't have the right name for it. I called it gardening, caretaking, work. But it was always love, the attention, the patience, the hope invested in something's growth without guaranteeing the outcome." She turned to face him fully. "You didn't teach me how to love, Dominic. You just helped me recognize what was already growing inside me." As the garden settled into evening around them, Fiona realized that the capacity she had feared was missing had been her strength all along. This ability to nurture life through seasons of bloom and dormancy, to invest in growth without demanding immediate returns, to find beauty in resilience. Love, like the perennial plants she tended, hadn't been absent from her life. It had simply been expressing itself in patterns she hadn't recognized, waiting patiently for the right conditions to fully flower.